computer. There we go. We've started the recording. Okay. I'll go back to share screen. Okay, so welcome to the Gardens of New Zealand. This is a trip that I and my family made back in just before Christmas of 2024. Some of us were there for 4 weeks. Some of us were there for up to 7 weeks. And the photos that you're going to see are primarily my own, but Liz Livermore, who's another NHS member, was also in New Zealand a little later, and she was quite kind to contribute a few of her photographs to this endeavor as well. So the trip that we made, we flew from Ottawa, stayed overnight in Vancouver one night, and then we landed in Auckland. And Auckland is towards the northern tip of the North Island. The two islands are appropriately named North Island and South Island. And it was from North Island that we began our journey. The place that we landed in, Auckland, about 1/3 of the residents of New Zealand live in the metropolitan area of Auckland. Has a population larger than Ottawa. It's 1.7 million residents. And the land is situated on 53 inactive volcanic fields. So you can appreciate just how hilly the city is. It also is earthquake prone as well. Fortunately, we didn't experience either of those activities. So one of the first places that I visited was the Domain Winter Gardens. These gardens are in the center of the city, and as the name suggests, they were designed so that they could be available. The plants would be available throughout the winter, and it's free. So a few of these images are of the gardens inside. Here's a pond with some very large lily pads. And one of the things I discovered in New Zealand is they really like their ferns. So accompanying the winter gardens was this fernery with about 100 different varieties of ferns. Some were, as you can see, relatively small, but many were upwards of 1 to 2 stories tall, giving the feeling of being in a forest. From Auckland, we traveled further north to the town of Paihia. Paihia is significant because this is where the Treaty of Waitangi was signed, and this is a treaty that set out constitutionally how the relationship would move forward between the Maoris, who were the indigenous people, and the Europeans, primarily the British. From Paihia, we traveled on to Tapaki, and you'll see a picture of the incredible sand dunes there. And then we headed back south to Waipoua, which is the home of the mighty kauri trees. This is a view from our motel, and I have to say this is one of the most striking views that I've ever seen from a motel. This is the Waitangi River, and the Waitangi River flows out to the east coast of the North Island. One of the islands that we visited was the town of Russell, and there's this incredible fig tree. This is my wife Betty, who's just sitting on the tree, just to give you an appreciation of just how large this tree is. It was planted in 1870 and is one of the landmarks in this very old European settlement. These are a couple of pictures that Liz provided showing these incredible walls of succulents that were growing in one particular neighborhood. These are the Tapaki sand dunes, and you may not be able to see them very well, but if you look to the extreme right, you'll see some little black figures. Well, those figures are trying to make their way all the way to the highest point that you can see here, and their objective is to toboggan, if I can use that expression, down these sand dunes. And it's a very popular activity. Some people bring their own sand toboggans, but they could be rented as well. And from here, you also have access to what is called 90 Mile Beach, which is actually not 90 miles, but the name has stuck. And if you have a four-wheel vehicle, you can travel down that beach for hours and hours. And all of this is free. We then made our way to the kauri forest. Now, the kauri tree is the largest indigenous tree in New Zealand. They're very versatile. They were used for all types of construction, from homes to furniture. Unfortunately, in addition to being overlogged, the kauri trees are also susceptible to a pathogen. And as a result, these trees and these forests are now under protection. It's a soil-borne pathogen called the Phytophthora agathicida. I'm massacring the name, but essentially it's a pathogen that infects the kauri trees through their roots. So when you enter these forests, they often have turnstiles where you have to clean your boots in the expectation then that you won't be bringing in any pathogens and hopefully forestall any further decimation of these magnificent trees. This is one of the larger kauri trees in the forest. And not far from there, in the town of Matakoni, there's a museum that's devoted to all things kauri. In this picture, you can see different types of furniture that were made from the kauri tree. Even the beams that you see in the museum were also made from the kauri tree. There was a modest fee to go into this particular museum. From Waipoua, we then headed further south to the town of Hamilton, and this is where you'll see one of the more formal gardens. And then we also made a trip to Hobbiton. Hamilton's a modest-sized city of about 190,000, and its primary attraction is the Hamilton Gardens. Now, I discovered they're not a true botanical garden for the reason that they don't conduct any research there. However, their focus is on landscape design, and they have a number of thematic gardens that are quite stunning. The gardens themselves are operated by the city. Interestingly, the land was originally a waste land used as a dump, but it's been rehabilitated and is now a very popular attraction by New Zealanders and visitors alike. There is a fee to enter the park. So these are some of the thematic gardens. This particular one is an Indian char bag garden, very colorful, lots of familiar flowers. You'll see zinnias and marigolds in the picture. This is the Italian Renaissance garden, and what's prominent here are the very manicured hedges and the pools and the statuary that adorn the gardens. There is, of course, a Maori garden. This is the Te Parapara garden. And what you see in the middle of the garden is a storage, I guess for want of a better term, a storage shed, where the food that's been harvested would be kept. So typically the type of food that would be grown would be gourds, type of tuber, another crop similar to our spinach. And these would have been the food items that the Maori would have grown at the time of the arrival of the Europeans. This is one of the more stunning gardens. This is the ancient Egypt garden. You may be wondering where everyone is, because I really tried to take pictures when there was devoid of other people. But one thing that impressed me about a lot of these gardens was that they weren't uh, heavily trafficked. You could enjoy them and not feel that you were in amongst large crowds. And keep in mind, we were there during the their summertime. Schools were out, and I would have thought there would be a lot more people, but I was pleasantly surprised just how free we were to see these and not feel rushed. This is the Tudor garden. Again, very formal gardens. Anyone who's been to England, this would look very, very familiar. And again, the statuary. Almost every botanic garden I visited had a herb garden, and this is the one that appeared in Hamilton Gardens. You can see in the background. We didn't have much rain in Hamilton or in New Zealand, but this is the one time we did get rained on, and those clouds in the distance were about to break out very, very shortly. One of the things that was very interesting was their use of different types of what is called steampunk art. And I hadn't heard of steampunk before, but it's where found items, usually of a mechanical nature, are reimagined in a different way. And in this case, it was what they called the Huddleston airship.
Excuse me, Jack. Somebody needs to mute themselves, please.
Yes. If everyone could please make sure, otherwise I have to stop sharing to find out who it is. But okay, I think I am going to have to stop sharing just to see. Okay, I'm just going to mute. There, I think that took care of it. So, and there is a town in the South Island which is devoted to steampunk art. And although I won't be showing you any images of it, if you're interested in this type of artwork, I can certainly provide you with the information, and they have a great museum there. One of the gardens at Hamilton that were really enjoyed by the young people was the Surreal Garden. And you sort of have a sense of what you're going to see. This is actually very level, this entryway, but just the way it's designed, it's made to look like there's a depression as you enter into the gardens. And of course, you can see why there's such an attraction for young people. Some of the items you can climb up. The rain started to come down at this point, and many of these people that you see here, in a couple of minutes, they were all huddled underneath this wheelbarrow. And of course, some of the older people, and this is Conrad, Liz's spouse, enjoy the work inside the garden as well. And this happens to be my son, who was trying to get up to the latch that led into, I guess, another part of the garden. He's 6'7", so it gives you an idea of just how large that particular gate is. Any of you who are fans of Lord of the Rings may know about Hobbiton. Hobbiton is the a place where the Lord of the Ring films, a lot of the scenes were done. Um, this wasn't necessarily one of the places I wanted to go to, but I was outvoted by three other members of the family. But I have to say, I was very impressed, despite the fact that I'm not a big fan of the movies, and despite the cost of going. If you get there on a nice day, it's well worth the tour, and it is a tour that you have to go on. It's not something that you can explore on your own. They've been doing tours here since 2002, and the land is still owned by the farming family, the Alexanders, whose land was discovered by Sir Peter Jackson, the director and producer of the films. And they'd been running tours for almost 20 some years. These tours have to be booked well in advance. Some people were disappointed when they showed up and found out that they couldn't go on the tours because they are just so popular. But if you have a nice day to go, it's well worth it because, again, there's some very interesting elements in terms of design and gardens. Many of the houses that you may have seen from the films, you can get to see up close. Here's one of the Hobbit houses, and all of the houses have lovely gardens in front of them. One of the primary attractions is the home of Bilbo Baggins. And what's noteworthy about this house is if you can see the tree that appears just above his house, that tree is completely man-made. It's artificial. And even though it was painstakingly created for the films, I believe it only appears for a total of 15 seconds in any of the films. Such was the detail that Peter Jackson put into his films. And even at Hobbiton, they have a working herb and vegetable garden. And as we finished our tour, we walked through this garden, and these items are harvested on a daily basis. From Hobbiton, we made our way to Rotorua, which is the very popular spot in New Zealand for all things thermal. Because of all the volcanic activities, there's hot springs and bubbling mud pots and so forth. And then we went on to uh, a town that I will not pronounce just yet for reasons I'll explain later, and eventually on to New Plymouth. Now, Rotorua is probably one of the most visited towns in New Zealand because of all of the thermal activity that takes place there. But again, I didn't find it all that touristy, despite the fact we were there in the prime tourist season. Many things are free in Rotorua. This is a municipal park called Kuaroa Park, and there you can see firsthand some of the thermal springs. Of course, you can't go in them because they're very, very hot, but you can certainly appreciate them at fairly close range. Not far from Rotorua, there is a place called Waio Tapu. Now, there is a very large site that I would well recommend visiting. It's not that expensive. It's called the Waio Tapu Wonderland. But there are also free sites that you can visit, and these are the mud pools that are bubbling and quite fascinating. I had hoped to show you one in action, but unfortunately, because I had to switch to an older laptop, the movie won't operate. So I'm just able to show you the picture, but I won't be able to actually show you bubbling in real time. We then made our way to the Mount Tongariro area, Again, if any of you are familiar with The Lord of the Rings, this mountain features as Mount Doom in the films. The community near there, we always thought it was called Waka Papa until we discovered that the WH is actually pronounced like the letter F. And consequently, when we learned that, we were a little reluctant to pronounce the name with the F sound, as you can perhaps guess why. So we continued to call it Waka Papa. And in Waka Papa, there's some incredible trails. These are pictures that Liz Livermore provided in the national park. There's a very famous crossing that many people undertake, but it's very much weather dependent, whether you can do the walk. And as you can see in these images, it's very foggy, and probably the crossing would have been closed on that particular day. More pictures from Liz. These are some of the native plants that were growing in this very, very rugged and desolate part of New Zealand. Now, not far from there, I thought this was a neat way for encourage children to appreciate vegetables. This was free. It was called Carrot Adventureland. And there were a number of these very large structures that kids could run around, climb on. And again, I appreciated the fact that it was free. Here's a turnip of some sort. And then from there, we made our way to New Plymouth, which is on the west coast, a warmer part of New Zealand. And it's a modest-sized city of about 60,000. One of the reasons I wanted to go there is that in one guidebook I had read, Pukakura Park was listed amongst one of the top 10 botanical gardens in the world. So we made our way there, and we actually went there at night. First, because they have what they call the Festival of Lights. This runs from mid-December to early February, and it was just buzzing with people. Whole families, young and old, were just in these large throngs looking at these incredible lights that were used to enhance the foliage in the park. And it was just such a joy to be there at that time of the year. And a lot of these lights were also accompanied by music, which I'd hoped to be able to have you listen to. But again, because of the laptop I'm using, I won't be able to do that. This is one example. There are these hundreds of floral lights. And again, what would happen is the music would play, these flowers would change color in tempo with the music. Plus, it would be synchronized with music. It was just absolutely magical. And this was one of about a dozen major light events in the park. Here's the same set of lights, but they've changed to another hue. Just some more of these light fixtures. These ones, the images that you see on the freestanding sculptures, they would change their appearance in accompaniment of the music that people were listening to. Betty and I returned the next day to appreciate the park in the daytime. And again, it was just like the expression night and day, that was the difference when we went in the daytime. We had the park completely to ourselves. Again, this is the height of summer. And in this park, we seldom came across other visitors. The park also had its own fernery, and this one we descended, and again, it was just absolutely magnificent. The greenhouse was spectacular, all kinds of plants that probably would survive outdoors, but were just growing so vigorously within the greenhouse itself. Some magnificent flowering plants. I wasn't able to identify what they were. So if you know what they are, you could enter that into the chat feature later. And one of the reasons the park is so popular is that it's built around two very large lakes. So water features very prominently in the design of this park. And the trails are very accessible. So anyone who has mobility issues would have no issue wandering around this park. Just a few ducks using one of the ponds. Again, these magnificent ferns, these ones now are outdoors. Um, One of the things I really appreciate about New Zealand was the complete absence of bugs. Now, they do have mosquitoes, but again, despite the fact this was a summer, we were pleasantly surprised by the fact that we were not being consumed by bugs, and you could walk quite freely and not be completely bitten alive, as would typically happen in one of our forests. Um, One of the places near just on the outskirts of New Plymouth that was suggested by our guidebook to visit was a place called Tupari House. Now, this was originally a private residence, but it's been made into a garden that, again, is free for people to visit. And I happened to go there very late in the day. It was about an hour before closing. And again, I think I encountered two people the whole time I was there. I was quite surprised how I had it pretty much to myself. So this was a garden that was started by the Matthews, Russell and Mary Matthews, back in 1931. And you may not be able to read this plaque, but what it's saying is that when they started, there was only a single tree on their property, and they cleared the gorse, the bracken, and other plants on the property to create just this magnificent, magnificent garden. And this is the result of their work. And this is only a small part of the garden. To me, it's just staggering what these two people were able to accomplish on their own. These paths wound. I was walking pretty briskly because I knew I only had an hour, but I could easily have spent 2 hours, 3 hours there. There was just so much to see. And again, I was just blown away by all the work that this couple had done. And it's on quite hilly terrain. And this is one of the views from one of their pathways looking out onto a greenhouse. And again, an appreciation for just how mature these trees are that they had planted some 90 years ago. From New Plymouth, we made our way to the capital city, Wellington. And this is sort of the iconic image for Wellington. It's their Parliament building, which is also called the Beehive because its shape is very, very much reminiscent of a beehive. The botanical gardens in Wellington are located on top of a hill, and probably the most attractive way to get there is the cable car. So they have a cable car that makes about 4 stops, and the last stop, it brings you to the gardens themselves. The gardens are all free. They are undulating hills, so although everything is paved, it can be a bit challenging for people who have mobility issues because some of the pavement can be a little steep. In this one section, you can see the cacti that are growing. They also had an educational section. I thought this was quite intriguing. They were growing these plants in these plastic containers that had been cut out on one side. So a neat way for people who want to do container gardening on the cheap. In this educational center, they also had this massive structure for beneficial creatures to provide them with a home. This was also within the educational section, some of the herbs that they were growing in that part. And then this is their formal herb garden. This was on one uh, very hilly portion of the Wellington Gardens. And it was from this garden that you can then look down upon the rose garden. And in this case, there was no nice ramp. You could only get down there by it was about 100 steps to get down there. But again, it gives you an appreciation for the hilliness of Wellington and how they use that to their advantage in doing their landscaping. The roses weren't necessarily at their prime, but still well worth a visit. And they had hundreds of different roses growing in this particular garden. From Wellington, we then took the ferry and eventually made our way to Christchurch. And in the process of doing so, we crisscrossed what are called the New Zealand Alps on a number of occasions. So the Alps pretty much dominate the western side of the island, and then the area between Christchurch and Dunedin is fairly flat, and uh, that part is probably more reminiscent of the lands that you would see in eastern Ontario. Christchurch is the largest city in South Island. It's well known, tragically, for the earthquake that struck it not that long ago. This is a picture of the cardboard cathedral. It actually is made of cardboard, and this is the Anglican cathedral that was constructed. It was intended as a temporary cathedral, but it's still in operation, and I'm not entirely sure when the new cathedral will be built. So the botanical gardens, they begin at this very formal entry point, this magnificent fountain. In the background, you can see these incredible series of buildings. They are home to a variety of different arts institutions. One's a theater, one's a film, a place to go see films. Anyway, we again arrived late in the afternoon, and again, we had almost the entire set of gardens to ourselves. The gardens themselves were founded in 1863. They encompass about 52 acres, and if we had been there earlier, we probably could have spent easily half a day exploring all of what the gardens had to offer. Hydrangeas are very popular in New Zealand, and this is a good example in the gardens in Christchurch. Magnificent trees, a very fine collection in their arboretum of their native trees. And then, of course, they have their formal gardens as well. And you really appreciate the British influence. In fact, I often felt New Zealand was as British as Britain in terms of their interests, their food, their customs, and so forth. And the garden certainly reflected that as well. Dahlias were magnificent. So I was fortunate to be there when they were in full bloom. Here are some of the taller varieties being helped with some lovely stakes. They had a great variety. Here are some shorter varieties of dahlia. And then these are some close-ups. These are ones that Liz took when she was there. And clearly she was there on a sunnier day. As we were there, it was pretty overcast. Just another view of some of the formal parts of the garden. And then some plants that are more recognizable to us. So beautiful sets of daisies here, long grass in the background. And then from Christchurch, at this point, my wife, she headed back to Canada, but I continued on with my two kids, my two adult kids, and we crisscrossed the Alps a few more times, and we made our way to Queenstown and Milford Sound, and finished up in Dunedin. So Queenstown, best as I can describe it, it's sort of like the Banff of New Zealand. It's a small town, but the visitors outnumber the locals probably by a ratio of 5 to 1. It was extremely crowded. It wasn't to my liking, the downtown. I just found it very touristy. But again, to my surprise, um, the gardens were completely devoid of people. So even though it's a very popular destination, the town itself, the gardens don't appear to be the primary attraction. So these gardens are quite old. They go back to 1867. Um, they are about 36 acres, and again, they're free to wander about. Water is a very prominent part of these gardens, as are the sculptures. There's a very happy dog uh, running over a lily pad. And one section, I came across these incredibly tall conifers, which just, I was staggered by their size. I was also almost staggered by a frisbee, because what I didn't realize, you may see them way off in the distance. I didn't realize I was in the middle of a golf frisbee area. So these people are throwing frisbees, and you can't see them, but they're hoops that they're trying to get these frisbees in. And I was nearly decapitated, and I apologized for wandering in, and they were equally apologetic too. New Zealanders are a very friendly group of people, I found. Dunedin, um, this is probably their architecturally their most iconic image. This is the magnificent railway station in Dunedin. New Zealand doesn't have many working railroads anymore, but at the height of the railroads, the good folks of Dunedin decided they needed a magnificent rail station, and this is their contribution. And even outside the rail station, there were beautiful gardens. These are amongst my favorite flowers, the delphiniums, and they were obviously in full bloom. Now in Dunedin, they claim to be the oldest botanical garden. I was struck by the fact it's the same age as Christchurch, so their claim to being the oldest must be just by months or days. Again, it's free. It covers 82 acres, and there are 15 distinct collections that you can visit. And again, as I'm wandering these gardens, and this is sort of midday, um, there are very few other people who are taking advantage of these gardens, as you can see. So this is one of the grand walkways. So much of the gardens are on fairly level ground, and then you rise up, uh, as you can see in the background, to this section where they have an an aviary with some of their well, I guess some of them are domestic birds, but the ones that are flying wouldn't be. Then they also have what they call their geographic collection, which are plants from around the world. Beautiful sculpted gardens in their more formal areas. Water again plays a significant part in the botanic gardens. Sculptures. This one, not surprisingly, is called The Worm. And there were kids there, but they had disappeared at this point. But this was a great attraction for them. And again, I'm just struck by the beauty of the native trees everywhere I looked in this particular botanic garden. There was one garden that was dedicated to an American professor by the name of Clive Lister. He was a geophysicist who lectured at the University of Otago in Dunedin, and he so loved Dunedin that he bequeathed a significant amount of money to establish a garden within Dunedin, and the gardens that you're about to see are the result of his bequest. Again, just staggering what they were able to produce with foliage. You don't see a lot of flowers, but the foliage itself is really quite stunning. Different textures, different shades of blue and green. Very, very meditative, I found as I wandered around these gardens. These happen to be amongst my favorite plants, the Ligularia, and these were doing extremely well. It surprised me because they were blooming, which was sort of midsummer, and I'm used to these blooming sort of later in the summer. But again, very, very beautiful flowers. This was their herb garden, and it was made yeah, there's a better view of it. So the beautiful flagstone construction with a fountain in the center. And again, well designed so that you can appreciate all of the plants at their different heights. They had formal water gardens and native water gardens as well. And this is one of the native water gardens. And in the background, you can see the pathway that's going to start to take me up the hill. But before I went up the hill, I visited their winter garden. And inside the winter garden, they had their cacti. This is one close-up of the cacti. Here's some more examples of the plants that were within the greenhouse. And then I made my way up the hill, and again, very gentle slope, so accessible to people, even for those who are mobility challenged. And these paths meandered throughout the hillside. Incredible rock gardens, just magnificent. And I was fortunate that many of the plants were in bloom at this time. And again, they took advantage of the contours and the shapes to enhance the beauty of the evergreens, as well as the flowers and shrubs that appear here. And again, the thing about these gardens, you want to see them all, and you come to a fork and you're wondering which way should I take. So that's the beauty, is that you just go keep exploring and just be excited by what new surprises you find as you're traveling around these gardens. I did take a few close-ups of some of the alpine plants.
Mm.
And then looking back from that hillside towards the more formal parts, you actually see a few people, but these are amongst the few people. I think this was a tour group. But as I say, again, I was struck by the fact that I pretty much had these gardens to myself. And then when I got to the geographic part, there was a section dedicated to North America. So uh, very pleasantly surprised to see all of these plants that we would easily see in this part of Eastern Ontario. Some goldenrod, some gooseneck plants, some asters. Now, one of the things, of course, because the climate in New Zealand is so pleasant, there are many plants. Almost all plants you can conceive of could probably grow there. And unfortunately, they've become quite invasive. So one of them is the crocosmia plant. It's not too aggressive, but I did find this one patch that was growing near the Tasman Sea. But the plant that is really prevalent and is considered a major invasive weed is agapanthus. This is you often will see them on roadsides. Sometimes they're cultivated as hedges, but they really are disliked by a lot of people in New Zealand just because of their aggressive nature. I understand these plants originally came from South Africa. So that finishes the formal part of the gardens of New Zealand. I just wanted to say, though, that for anyone who's interested in going there, there are three airlines that travel there. We happen to go with Air New Zealand. If you wanted to break up the trip, you can also travel by Air Fiji, either your way there or the way back. And that's something my daughter did. And it was a nice way to take in those two island nations, New Zealand and Fiji. Now, to get around New Zealand, you have a few options. We looked at renting a van. So the one at the bottom is very, you'll see a lot of them in New Zealand. It's called the Juicy Company. But when I worked out the cost of renting a van versus renting a small car and staying in hotels, motels, etc., it worked about to be the same price. And the disadvantage of the vans are some of the roads are very narrow and very, very hilly. And these vans, you could see they were having some trouble getting up. They do get up the hills eventually, but they're a lot slower, and it's tight on some of those roadways. So I'm glad we elected to go with a small car. Air New Zealand has a very good system of intercity routes with and they're quite reasonably priced. So if you didn't want to go by car and you just wanted to visit the major cities, you could easily do that just by traveling with the domestic routes of Air New Zealand. In terms of accommodation, because we didn't go with the camper vans, so we stayed at what they called holiday parks. And these holiday parks were usually a combination of cabins or camping if you were bringing a tent or an RV, or they might be motel units. In this case, this was a cabin that we stayed at. I couldn't understand their alpha, uh, why they didn't go ABC until I realized they were spelling the name Fred. So we were in F room in this particular occasion. Some of the cabins are ultra modern. They can be very small. Some of them you don't have washroom facilities within the cabin, as was the case here. So there's a communal washroom. Some of them are set in very lush surroundings, such as this one, which we stayed at on the South Island. And then there are also huts that you can rent. And this was a shepherd's hut that we stayed in. So the hut in the foreground is where we slept. And then in behind was the structure where the washroom and the kitchen area were located. And just to give you an idea of what the interior of the hut looked like, it was, although small, it certainly was enough for Betty and me. I found this really enchanting. So this is Christmas time in New Zealand. They don't have any snow, but in the rural areas, they love to decorate their mailboxes. So you would often see these decorations, trees or stars, on their mailboxes during the Christmas season. The other option is staying at hostels, and they mostly cater to the young adults, but I felt perfectly at home. And again, you have your own room, and then there are shared eating facilities. Hostels are generally reasonably priced. The exception is when you get to Mount Cook. Because of the limited accommodation, all accommodation near Mount Cook is very expensive. So the least expensive option in this case was the local hostel. There are, of course, Airbnbs. So these range from homes, such as this one that we stayed in on Christmas Day. There are some very new structures that have been built by enterprising Airbnb owners. This was one such example. And there are ones that we stayed in both within the city, but also out in the suburbs. And again, we found them all well provisioned. We didn't eat out a lot. Not that restaurants were expensive, but we just found that we enjoyed being together as a family and making most of our meals where we were staying. This is one of the more interesting ones. This was an Airbnb, but it was a trailer, and it was very well adorned inside. It was run by a couple who had immigrated from Germany, and the view on the bottom left is what we looked onto from our trailer. It was just a joy in the morning to look out and see these two sheep who they'd look at us, but if we tried to get any closer, they'd run off. They also have self-catering motels. So again, you can save money by they would have a fridge and they'd have some form of cooking appliances so that you could do a lot of your own meals. This is just another example of a self-catering motel. And then the final type of accommodation, we would call these cabins or cottages. They're called box. Why, I've forgotten. But these can be rented. And again, they're very well equipped. In terms of the expense of New Zealand, I was always told New Zealand was a very expensive place. It's true to get there. The flight is expensive. But right now, the Canadian dollar works out to about $1.25 New Zealand. So our dollar is doing quite well. They have a valued added tax. It's included in the price of everything. So there's no extra tax that's going to be on top of your purchases, whether it's a restaurant meal or something that you buy at a clothing store. And there's no tipping. You can't tip. Well, I suppose you can tip, but I mean, when you go to pay, there's no tipping option. So restaurant meals are actually quite reasonably priced when you factored in how strong the Canadian dollar was. There's no tax and there's no tipping. But notwithstanding that, we still elected to do most of our dining in the places we were staying. So thank you very much for joining me on this journey. I Would strongly recommend if you'd like a lovely holiday during our winter. I can't think of a better place to spend it. New Zealand is safe, it's clean, it's not that expensive. The people are very, very pleasant, and I would gladly go back again. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'll take any questions.
I'll apologize for being late, Jack.
Well, not to worry, not to worry. And I'm just going to see if I can actually access the chat feature here. Um, let's see, chat.
Jack, while you're looking for that, I want to say that the only good thing that came out of COVID is Zoom. Because if we didn't have Zoom, we would have had a canceled meeting tonight.
Well, yes, and I, uh, I when I looked at the weather forecast, I saw two conflicting. One said 5 to 10 centimeters. I thought, well, we're from Ottawa. We can handle 5 to 10 centimeters. And I thought it was Toronto that was in a big panic. But as the day progressed, I appreciated, no, things were getting a little dicey. And when I got into the church parking lot, which was not plowed, and the walkway wasn't cleaned out, I thought, no, I think best if people just stay home. So I think people made the um, right choice. So I think I can see let's see if there are any questions.
I can read them out, Jack, if you want.
Yes, if you could, I'd appreciate that. I'm having difficulty accessing them.
Okay, Madeline said, I'm eating my soup dinner, so my video is off for now. Thank you, Jack. Hello, everyone, says Elaine. Why do we not have sound? It's in volume. What's the date? Jack, oh, this is my question, but you answered it. I guess my question was, did you rent a car in Auckland and then travel around? But my next question, Jack, is did you do a lot of planning in Canada, or did you kind of meet people and they say, oh, go there, it's so much better than
So because I again I had this idea that New Zealand was a fairly small country. And in terms of distances, it's not that big, except that because the terrain is very hilly, it takes longer to
Mm.
get to places. So when I would look up Google Maps, I was surprised that the driving time was longer than what I expected. And it's not because the roads are bad, it's just that they're very windy and hilly in some places. So you have to take more time. The other thing is you need to check each day if there's been a major storm, whether there's been a rock slide or a landslide, because there was one major highway that had been closed for 2 months before we arrived. And I was afraid we were going to have to do a 10-hour detour. But by the time we got there, it had improved significantly. They only closed the roads for about 2 hours each day. So we just had to time it so that we weren't delayed. But for the most part, yeah, we did a fair bit of planning. But when people would tell us of something, for example, uh, where I showed you that picture of the trailer, that was in a place called Collingwood, and the people we were staying with, the German couple, told us about these incredible, um, uh, I guess I'd call them mountains that you could walk, little mountains that you'd walk to when the tide was low and you could wander around, but they weren't in any guidebooks that we'd heard about. So it was useful talking to locals because they often knew about these hidden gems that weren't necessarily, because guidebooks can only include so much. But I did find it helpful to plan a number of things to take advantage of the fact that we had limited time, but we were prepared to divert, especially if the weather proved unpleasant, but we were fortunate. We had very few rainy days. In fact, most of the days when it rained, it was the days we were traveling. Um, and I have to admit, I overpacked. I could have gotten away with just a carry-on because the weather was pretty pleasant. It ranged from about 28 degrees. They had what they called their heat wave in North Island. They were complaining about 28-degree weather, which I thought was actually quite nice for us. And then there weren't too many days where it was really cold. It might be get down to the mid-teens. So generally speaking, if you're traveling there between mid-December to early February, you can pretty much count on what I'd call sort of Mediterranean type weather.
So you needed a raincoat and you needed a sweater.
A raincoat and a sweater, yeah. If you had those, you were fine. I spent most of my time in shorts and sandals. And as I said, there's only one bug that is bad, and we never encountered it. It's called the sand fly, and it's found where there's rushing water. I usually associate insects with stagnant water, but it's where there's rushing water. Now, these bites can be very irritating, but for whatever reason, even though we bought insect repellent, we never used it. And as I said, mosquitoes are negligible. And it was as I say, it was a real joy walking through these forests. And not only is there the absence of bugs, but one of the things I appreciate about New Zealand is that there are no dangerous creatures. There's nothing that can harm you or kill you. The one exception is that there are certain thermal pools that they warn you not to put your head underwater because there's a brain-eating amoeba in these pools. So, and they tell you quite clearly where they are. So I, of course, did not put my head underwater, but other than that, there's nothing dangerous in terms of animal life in New Zealand. There are no snakes. There's nothing. Now, there are animals that are not indigenous to New Zealand that the New Zealanders have a real dislike for. There's the Australian possum, and that's the major roadkill that you'll see in New Zealand because these creatures come out at night. They're not very smart, and they get themselves hit by cars at night. But the other creatures are the wallaby, which was also introduced from New Zealand, and deer. Deer are quite common there as well. And these are all mammals that they're trying to either extirpate or to get under control because what they do is they compete with the native creatures. Many of the birds in New Zealand are flightless, and unfortunately, kiwis have been pretty much relegated to very small parts of New Zealand where they can be protected from creatures like rats and mice and other things that might either attack or compete for food for flightless birds.
Thank you, Jack. It's amazing. They're so close to Australia where anything in Australia will kill you.
And that's why I've never been to Australia.
I guess my next question, if I don't mind, is pricing of gas. Do they have cameras to be caught speeding? You know, all that. Is it similar to Canada in a lot of ways, do you find?
So gas, yes, that's the one thing that's definitely more expensive. And this is why I would strongly recommend renting a small car as opposed to one of those vans, because those vans would take up a lot of gas. But to be quite honest, because of the fuel economy of the cars that we rented, I had to rent two different cars because the first car we rented, we were limited to 30 days, but I was able to leave it in Christchurch, and then I rented a different car with a different company after that. What was the second part of your question, Pauline?
Do they have speed cameras?
Oh, they don't have speed cameras, but they do have, they do enforce the speed limit very, very rigorously. And the reason I say that is that, this will be the first Betty will have heard this, but I got caught on my last day for speeding. And I was the last car in a convoy of cars, and I was stopped, and I knew I was in trouble because I could see the flashing lights. I was stopped by this gentleman, very pleasant. I think he was originally from Eastern Europe from his accent. And he was apologetic about the fact that he had to stop me. Um, and in fact, he was so apologetic, he reduced the fine. I think I wound up paying $20 equivalent. But I was over, I think, by 10 kilometers. Uh, and so that, and I, prior to that, I was very careful about the speed limits. In fact, the only reason I was speeding, I was in the part of New Zealand that was actually flat. In other parts of New Zealand, the speed limit is still 100 kilometers, but there's no way, because of the hilliness and the curves, you're going to go 100 kilometers. So what happens is, fortunately, they have pullouts. So when you start to see cars piling up behind you, because these are locals who know the roads, you just pull over, and then they politely honk to say thank you, and then you get in behind them. And so, again, I didn't find it too nerve-wracking driving. I think Betty might say otherwise, but I found the roads are well constructed. They're not potholed like some of ours. And as I said, with these pullouts, you were able to let people who, if you're, if you're well below the speed limit, to allow them to drive past you. And the drivers there are very courteous. I rarely encountered some of the unfortunate habits that we're starting to see in Ottawa with people who are very aggressive. There are people, and one of the things I realize is a lot of New Zealanders don't travel very much, even within their own country. I was surprised to find, in talking to some people, who had never been to the other island or even to another part of their own island, because they thought a journey of more than an hour or two was just too excessive. Whereas in Canada, we're used to driving, 5, 6, 7 hours to get the destination. So it's just a different perspective on time and distance, I find.
Rosemary says in Rotorua, when I was there, our feet got hot from walking on the volcanic rocks.
Yes, and we stayed on the paved parts. I can't say that we ever encountered that. They have them well marked so that you don't inadvertently step onto some of the mud pots, because that obviously would scald you. So they're very, very good at letting people know what the dangers are. And in fact, in one of the parks in Rotorua, they had a place where you could soak your feet in these hot thermal waters, and people were taking advantage of that. So
I have a question. The Tupari House, it was founded in 1930. So is it a national trust that owns it now?
I believe, yeah, I believe it must be,
If
because
it's free.
the family doesn't live there anymore. And this is the thing that struck me. There were a lot of things that were free in New Zealand. Most of the botanic gardens were free, and even some of the smaller towns would have their own gardens. I mean, there are about a dozen major botanic gardens in New Zealand, but there are many others that are smaller that are well worth a visit as well. There seems to be a point of pride in New Zealand. The other thing that I was really impressed by in New Zealand, public washrooms. Even the smallest town had a clean, easily found public washroom, which I again just speaks to how civilized New Zealand is.
Well, we're getting a new public washroom on Bank Street, by the way. It was in the news. Rosemary asked Jack, any idea how many staff it takes to manage this garden? Rosemary, are you referring to the Tupari?
So this is the interest. I'm
I
glad
have to sorry, I had to unmute. Yes, sorry. Yes, I was. It was a beautiful garden, and I just wondered, like, how many people does it take to manage it?
So this is, I'm glad you asked that question, Rosemary, because one of the things that struck me was in all the gardens I visited, I never saw any workers. I don't know when they do their work. Because I would be at some of these gardens in the morning or in the midday or in the afternoon. But yeah, it's a mystery to me because I would think they would require a lot of work and every day, but I honestly did not see them. So whether they only come out at night or I don't know, but they're very, very well maintained.
Yeah, I just wondered with the size of my own just little garden in the city, like it's a lot of work. And I know with a Montreal Botanical Garden, you always see people working there. So
No,
I was curious.
no. And and because I didn't see any workers, I couldn't even ask them that question. So.
If anybody wants to say anything, they can just unmute. My next question, my next comment was excellent presentation, very informative. And I thought your slides were so very clear and beautiful. Did you use just an iPhone, Jack?
Yes, so my daughter, she upgraded her iPhone, so I had access to her old phone, but I also had an old Nikon camera as well. So between the two of them, and I would strongly recommend having a good quality camera that you can trust, just because for some people, this may be the one and only time they ever visit New Zealand. So you want to have good quality photos when you leave. But I was impressed with the quality of, and this, as I say, this was my daughter's older phone. I haven't seen her pictures to know just how good hers are, but I'm sure they're even that much better.
Rosemary said, love your presentation. Liz said, this was great, Jack. I really enjoyed revisiting some of the same places where we explored, as well as seeing the ones we didn't get to. Thank you. Cynthia says, agree, wonderful slides. Makes me want to escape from the snow for a month. And then Rita said, enjoyed presentation very much. Anybody else have any comments? You can unmute yourself.
Because we're getting close to the end, I just wanted to say if anyone is interested in our itinerary, just to give a sense of where we actually went, not where we thought we were going to go, I'd be happy to pass that on. You can just email me just because it will give you some idea of what you might want to consider. And of course, in this trip, I mean, I really wanted to see these gardens, but I was very mindful. I had three other people in the family who had other interests as well. So it is a active negotiation to see what you want to see. But I think we all enjoyed the different places and as I said, every day was something spectacular. However, that being said, the thing that struck me was, in many ways, New Zealand, except for the palm trees and the giant ferns, was very reminiscent of Canada. In one day, you could go from mountains that reminded you of the Rockies to flat land that reminded you of the prairies to urban settings that you would think you were easily in Eastern Ontario. So on the one hand, some people say, well, that doesn't sound, all that exciting because it's not all that different. But I also found it very reassuring. I felt very comfortable, very safe throughout my travels. The one exception is we repeatedly saw signs that said, when you were in parks and your car was unattended, they strongly recommend that you remove all valuables. And when my daughter and I did go on one walk, we passed a young woman who was returning from an overnight trip with a backpack. And when we turned around and we caught up with her in the parking lot, she was in tears because someone had broken into her car, smashed the windows, and taken whatever was in the car. So that warning that we had seen previously, it's true. There is It isn't to say New Zealand isn't crime free, but you just have to take a note of whatever people tell you to just take the appropriate precautions. But as far as traveling in general, felt, as I said, very safe in the main cities, walk around quite freely, never really felt any particular need to take any precautions or anything. So
Leslie Wilson says, thank you. Among other things, you did a great job of both the convener and the presenter. Rosemary asks, can you give us an approximate total cost of your trip and the length, please?
So, I was there for 7 weeks. Betty was there for 4 of the 7 weeks because that was sort of about her limit in terms of traveling, and that's, it is a fair bit of travel. I would estimate it was including the airfare, the rental of the vehicles, food, and so forth, probably in the vicinity of $10,000 to $12,000. I'd be estimating.
Is that per person?
No, that was for both of us in total. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to close.
As I said, the accommodation I found very reasonable. Compared to Canada, the prices were quite reasonable. And I mean, we weren't staying at any 3 or 4 or 5-star hotels, but where we were staying, they were quite eclectic. And we got to know, in the case of some of the Airbnb people, we got to learn about the area. In fact, one of them provided us with free deer sausages that he had just hunted the day before. So there's some small, nice perks to some of the places that you stay at.
That's it for the questions, Jack.
Okay, well, I can see it's almost 9 o'clock. So thank you everyone for joining. This was my first ever presentation. So thank you for indulging me.
Jack, one more. Madeline says, Jack, thank you for braving the elements to present wonderful records of your trip. And we all want to say good luck with your car and taking all the snow off the car. And hopefully you'll get home safely.
Yeah. I'm sure. I don't live, fortunately, I don't live very far away. So our next meeting, hopefully people will be able to join us in the hall. That's our guest speaker. That'll be, again, the third Thursday in February, and the weather. So if something like this happens again, I'll try to get out word a lot earlier if it looks like it's going to be an event where it's really not promising to come out. But again, we don't often have these occasions. Like if we'd had this meeting yesterday or the day before, the roads are clear and it was easy to get around. But we'll try to get word out. But otherwise, we will try to use the hybrid model and people can zoom in. But I do appreciate, and I certainly value the in-person element. So I hope to see many people come out to our February meeting. All right, well, that's it for me. Thanks, everyone. If any of you are cross-country skiers, I hope this weather is doing you a great favor. But for those of us who have shoveling to do, take it easy.
I know. I'm going outside right now.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks
Great
again.
job, Jack. Thank you.
Fantastic. Good night, Jack.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.